Hello and welcome to the Week 1 lecture for Art History 130 Museum Technologies. I wanted to briefly review the meaning of the word technology. As I'm sure you all know, that's basically the tools that you use to get your job done in any field. And while we use it more typically to talk about computer technology, I will hit on all the different kinds of technology used in museums. This week's points are the overview of basic museum and gallery definitions. I want to talk to you a little bit about the jobs, the roles, because I think that's an important starting point to understand how the technology gets used depends on what you're trying to do with it. I'm going to tell you about who I am and why I think I'm qualified to tell you about these topics. And because we are using discussion forums as part of our grade, I'll give you the first topic for what we will do in that forum. So, starting off though with a real general breakdown in museums, as far as I'm concerned, there are typically three major areas of work that are being done. One is preservation. Most museums are in the line of work of keeping stuff. There are exceptions to this rule. There are children's museums that aren't necessarily working to protect stuff, but they're working to protect ideas and the communication of those ideas. But in general, they do that with stuff. So preservation and keeping of stuff is the first. Presentation and education, the front of house stuff, the way that people on the outside see the stuff that's on the inside, and the promotion and business end of the thing where they're keeping the wheels turning in the background, making sure that the building is able to open its doors, people are aware that it's there and coming in to visit. So, my name, as I said, is Tim Campbell. I started off in school studying marine biology, and I have a bachelor's degree in that field. And while doing that, I started working for the first time with a collection. The school I went to had a collection of preserved fish specimens in glass jars full of formaldehyde with 3x5 cards labeling them. And that's where I had my first taste of this kind of work. And I soon after that took a summer job working for a museum of cultural art, and I learned that I really enjoy all of the things that go into this field. So if you follow the link at the bottom of this page, you'll get to see the progression of my career from those early days through my current efforts. And I won't go into all the details here. You'll pursue that on your own if you're interested. And I would welcome your questions through Blackboard. I'd be happy to answer anything that you want to know in more detail about that. So, in giving this more context, I wanted to provide some links to actual real world museum professional organizational charts that show you the job titles and how they relate to each other, who answers to who. And when you start to see some of those titles, you start to have again an understanding of what the roles are and what tools they might need to get those jobs done. And those are all things that these technologies would be tools to assist them with. Typically, when you look at these charts, some of them may or may not show, but at the top, the highest level, there's a governing body, a board of governors, a board of trustees, a city government, a state government, a federal government, a national government, whatever the case may be. But then when you get in, actually in the door of the building, there's a director or a president, and then things get split up. And as I said, I'm going to look at those three categories: the preservation, the presentation, and the business side. But when you look at these job titles, that's because I've combined when the bullet points here, basically the first and the last, into one category. But that's a business function. You'll see that the tools that they use in administration are pretty much the same tools that they're using in outreach and those other things as well. And I wanted to point out some unique job titles that you might not have heard of if you haven't worked in this field before, like curator, conservator, and preparator. A curator is someone who has, typically in the United States anyway, an academic expertise in a subject matter. So they would be the ones that could tell you a story in a museum with an exhibition. In other countries, that is not necessarily a term that's used in the same way. When you get into Europe and Asia, there are different ways that the institutions have grown up, so those jobs mean a little bit different thing, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that also through Blackboard. But conservator is a person in the US anyway who works to preserve or repair or clean artwork. there are details I'll go into about that in a later lecture, but they would do the physical touching and changing in some way of the artwork, usually to make it last longer. And a preparator is someone that's an art handler or an art installer or both. There's someone who's hands-on. Maybe they don't have the expertise of the curator in the academic end of things. Maybe they don't have the scientific expertise of the conservator and how to protect and preserve things, but they're expected to know how to safely handle the different materials and artworks and scientific specimens and other things that might be held by a museum. So that last part then is what I want to use as our discussion topic. I want you to go online, look at a museum that has a site that has explanations of the roles of their staff. And maybe I think what would be effective is if you can give me an institution name with a curator who works there and what they're the curator of. Maybe a different institution, a conservator name, and any specific field they might be a conservator in. And you're not going to find any preparators anywhere because they don't get any credit. But if you happen to know them personally, go ahead and throw that in. So that'll be the discussion topic for the first discussion forum, is to give me examples of the institutions and the individuals in these jobs. And I know that's more of an assignment than a discussion at this point, but if you do that, I'll know that you've started to look into these different roles, and we'll go from there for the second discussion. When I taught this class in the classroom, I did find a book that I could sort of make work, but I've abandoned that for this online version because it didn't really fit exactly the way I wanted to do things. But I think it's worth a quick look at how they broke down the information just to give you an idea of another way of looking at it than the way we're going to look at it. It might be something that you find interesting, it might not, but I think it's a good thing to see. They broke it down initially in looking at the information end of things, the study of the information, the structure of the information that museums use to do their particular job. Their second part was how technology is used to create a virtual experience for the outside person, and it focused on that idea of what is the experience. Their third part of the book talked about the same thing, but with a point of view particularly of providing access. So who got to see it? How did they get to see it? Especially with regard to folks who have physical handicaps. The next part was about how technology was used in education, and we are going to talk about that. The fifth part was how the objects that are held by a museum might be treated in a virtual reality environment. The next part was digitization projects. How do they turn what they have in a physical world into something that could be shared in a digital world? And then the last part was trying to make sense of all that together, which is an effort we will also make in this class. I feel we will probably have better odds of doing than they did in the book. And I've provided another link here for an interesting article called Five Ways Technology Will Shape the Nonprofit Sector in 2014. Obviously, that's a couple of years out of date already, but it's worth the read to see how people in the field of nonprofit businesses, which museums definitely are, were looking at technology. And again, I wanted to say, technology is the tools that you can use to get your job done. And some of these things occur in businesses pretty much across the board. Uh, but it's important to remember what they are. They are, in fact, technological tools. So you have your Microsoft Office suite, right? You've got Outlook for your email. You've got PowerPoints for presentations just like this one. Everybody's used Word or some other word processing application. Excel spreadsheets, and Microsoft Access, which maybe fewer of you have used as a database. All of those things are things I've certainly used in my job every single day. As a collections manager at the Laguna Art Museum, as an instructor at Irvine Valley College, as a curator at Golden West College, all of these places, these databases, spreadsheets, email certainly pervasively, and word processing constantly every day. Adobe Acrobat, especially the free Acrobat Reader. There's an idea that we'll talk about down the road about common platforms and the easiest way to ensure that your data can be read by the people you want to share it with. The idea of coming up with standards like JPEGs and GIFs for images, and PDFs for documents that you want to be able to share almost universally. So Acrobat Reader is an application that reads those. And then Photoshop, Illustrator, and more specialized graphic design applications that are also becoming pervasive and sort of universally understood to exist, if not constantly in use. So think about those tools, look around at other places in your life where you're using those, and think about how they might be used in particular in a museum environment. And those are things that we'll talk about as well.